Welcome to the Invention Stories podcast, where we share stories of inventors who turn their idea into a product. Please visit our website at www.inventionstories.com. And now, from the Invention Stories podcast World Headquarters Studios in Morro Bay, California, is our host, Robert Baer.
Welcome to the Invention Stories podcast, brought to you by the Socket Saver. My name is Robert Baer, and thank you for joining us. You're listening to episode 27, our interview with Louis Foreman of Enventys and Edison Nation. This episode is the first in a three-part series, and I'm really excited to share this interview with you because I believe Louis Foreman has helped people invent smarter. Louis's interest in starting businesses and developing innovative products began when he was a sophomore at college in Illinois, where he founded his first company right out of his dorm room. He's created 9 successful startups and has been directly responsible for the creation of 20 others. He's the inventor on 10 registered U.S. patents, and his firm is responsible for developing over 600 more. Louis has also created the Emmy Award-winning PBS TV show Everyday Edisons, which I highly recommend. I loved it. He's the publisher of Inventor's Digest, and in 2009, published the independent Inventor's Handbook. It is my honor to introduce you to Louis Foreman. Good morning, Louis. Thank you for joining us on the Invention Stories podcast. I'd like to start at the beginning. Your first business started off because you saw a need for lacrosse equipment?
I played for the university. We didn't have a local supplier of equipment. And I learned in Econ 101 that semester that when there's demand for a product or a service and when the market isn't satisfying that demand, there should be a business opportunity. So rather than just sit there and take notes, I thought I'll take action and I'll start a company. And, I've been an entrepreneur ever since.
When I went to college, I had my hands full just trying to keep up. But it seems like you are doing well in school and a fraternity and part of the lacrosse team. How did you find the time? Are you just somebody who likes to do a lot of things at the same time, or was it some driving force that made you want to start a business?
Yeah, I think if you really love what you're doing, you find time to do it. And so starting a business in college was certainly, there was a compromise. I mean, it probably meant less time doing other things. But between classwork and sports and running a business, I never looked at it and said, I'm not enjoying this, I need to stop. I was passionate about it. I was excited about what we were creating. We were building a real business, and that's what fueled my desire to spend even more time working on it.
Did school come easy to you? Were you a good student in high school? Were you a quick learner?
I would say I was a good student. I wasn't a great student. It came easy to me. I never put in more than I really needed to. So in high school, I was able to get by without a whole lot of studying. And in college, I probably could have done a whole lot better if I was focused. But it was important for me to graduate, and it was important for me to set a good example for my 3 younger sisters back at home. But at the same time, my real passion was in starting a company. And I knew that the education, although it was important, was secondary to my desire to be an entrepreneur, start companies, and really control my destiny.
What you've described is basic, supply and demand, Econ 101. So you were just sitting in class one day and thought, wow, if there's something that somebody needs, and that's the first time the idea struck you?
Yeah, it was as simple as that. My lacrosse coach was a professor in the business school, and he encouraged me to start a company. And so when I was talking about this opportunity that I saw, he said, look, college is a great time to go out and start a company, because the worst thing that can happen is if you're not successful, then you graduate and get a job like everybody else. And so it was a good time to try something, knowing that if things didn't work out, there was a plan B.
Yeah, that's smart thinking. Why didn't your coach go into business selling the lacrosse equipment? Did he feel like that was
Yeah, that probably would have been a good thing for him to do. I think he was pretty comfortable with his, being a professor. He was pretty old and probably didn't have the same drive to do it. But I think you bring up a good point, and that is, even though other people may see the same opportunity, entrepreneurs are uniquely suited to start those businesses. I used to think that anyone could start a company, that anyone was an entrepreneur. And the reality is that entrepreneurship is the assumption of risk. And a lot of people are not comfortable with risk and uncertainty. And entrepreneurs have this uncanny ability to process the relationship between risk and reward, not on a spreadsheet, but in their gut. They're able to look at a situation and say, I'm willing to assume a certain amount of risk because I understand that the reward can be much greater.
I guess it's just kind of a rush then, or it's just like who you are. It's more in step, because it sounded like your parents wanted you to get a regular job, And
I think they would have been thrilled if I would have gotten a regular job. And needless to say, when I told them that I was starting a company, they weren't thrilled about it. But over time, I think they got over it.
It sounded like the only way you could get your lacrosse equipment was to actually do it by mail order. Can I ask you what years you were at the college?
Sure. I started college in 85, and so I started the business in 87. And back in the 80s, certainly 87, there was really no internet. Cell phones you carried over your shoulder in a big bag. And so you couldn't start a business. You couldn't create a website. You didn't have email. There wasn't really a cell phone that you can give. So, back then I had a pager and an answering service. And when customers would place orders, they would call into an answering service. The answering service would explain that I was in a meeting. The reality was I was in class. And then they would send me a page. I would go to a payphone, call, get the message, and then call the customer back. That's how we did commerce back in the 80s.
Okay.
Needless to say, things have gotten a lot easier today with technology.
Yeah, no, and the opportunity would have been different because, okay, let's say you're going to school right now. Do you think with your personality type that you would have just found a different avenue to become an entrepreneur, or just hard to say because it's a different time and different place? I mean, obviously you can get lacrosse equipment in a lot of different avenues now.
Yeah, things have changed. It certainly would have been easier to start a business today than back then in terms of technology. You could look like a much bigger company with very little infrastructure, by just having a professional website and an email address. But at the same time, the opportunity may have been different. So there wouldn't have been as big of a lack of supply. Because back in the 80s when we needed to order something, we pulled out a catalog and we called a number and we placed an order, and then we waited days or weeks for it to arrive. Today, you'd go on Amazon or you'd go on some other website and probably have the product the next day or in 2 days.
So how did that work? You actually found the distributors for the lacrosse equipment that you wanted to purchase? Did you try to find the least expensive one or the one that gave you good terms?
Back then there was really two major manufacturers of lacrosse equipment. Brine and STX were the two major brands, and we bought directly from the manufacturers. There weren't distributors in between. We placed orders with the manufacturers. Initially, we were on COD terms, and then over time, as we continued to do more and more business with them, they gave us net 30 terms, but we would buy product from them, we would take delivery of it, and then we would ship the product to our customers.
Okay, so you took orders from your fellow teammates. Did you contact the opposing team and get the orders as well?
Oh, sure. Yeah, we printed out a mail order catalog, and we sent it to teams all across, the region. And we took orders from individuals as well as taking orders from teams.
And now it's time for a commercial break. The Invention Stories podcast is brought to you by the Socket Saver. Do the plugs fall out of your wall sockets? The Socket Saver is an easy, safe, and effective solution. No repairs necessary, no circuit breakers involved, no electrical knowledge or mechanical skills required. Socket Savers are inexpensive, efficient, and portable. For more information, please visit www.socketsaver.com. You started University Sportswear after that, is this correct?
Yeah, so the lacrosse business was good. I mean, it was a great experience, but lacrosse is seasonal. The orders tend to get concentrated in a couple months out of the year, and then the rest of the year, you don't really have a whole lot of business coming in. And what we realized is to diversify our business, we needed to figure out what else could we sell to those same customers. And so we recognized that those teams that we were selling equipment to also needed T-shirts and hats and bags and other screen-printed apparel. So we quickly diversified into screen printing. So we would buy the blank garments from the manufacturers. We would have the printing, the screen printing done by local vendors in the area. And being in a fraternity at the time, we could also sell those screen-printed T-shirts to fraternities and sororities. So that part of our business grew very quickly. And a few years into it, we realized that's really where the volume was, not in lacrosse equipment. And so we changed the name of the company from Competitive Edge Sports, which was the original business, to University Sportswear. And we focused really exclusively on selling screen-printed apparel to fraternities, sororities, local businesses, and then eventually expanding into licensed products.
I noticed, Louis, you've been saying we a lot. Was it you, or did you start it with a partner, or is it just because you're always saying we, and that's a good way to speak because you're talking about the company no matter what company?
Yeah, I never take credit for doing anything on my own. We have a great company with really talented employees, and over the years, over the last 30 years of being an entrepreneur, I've always been able to have really exceptional people working with me. So I don't use the word I just because I feel like, as an entrepreneur, as a business owner, it's very rare that any one individually can accomplish anything solely on their own. It's a team effort.
That makes complete sense. You identified Nascar pretty early on for its great market potential and having great, loyal, rabid fans. Were you a NASCAR fan growing up?
Yeah, not at all. So I had never watched a NASCAR race. We were doing a lot of contract manufacturing back in Illinois for major sports brands. So we worked with companies like Nike and Reebok and Starter and Trench and Logo Athletic. These, back in the 90s were the big licensed products sportswear companies. And so we did a lot of NFL, Major League Baseball, NBA screen printing. But we were kind of intrigued by this new sport, that was growing in the South, NASCAR racing. We didn't know anything about it. There certainly weren't any races in Illinois at that point. But one of the clients that we were doing printing for, we were doing printing for them, and we saw it as a growing sport, and it was an opportunity to get into a sport before there was really any big players in that sport. All the major brands were focused on the professional sports like football, basketball, and baseball. No one was really in NASCAR. It was mostly local printers. And so in 1995, I sold the company that I had started in Illinois. I took a dozen of my best employees, moved them to Charlotte, North Carolina, started up operations in November of that year, and we were off and running.
How much fun was it to sell that company? Was it heartbreaking at the same time, or was it so exciting because you're making a good chunk of change? How did that feel?
It's bittersweet. It's always tough to leave behind something that you created, but we sold the company to a couple of guys that continued running the business after we left, and so it continued to do well even after we were gone. But we were really focused on building this new business in North Carolina, and the business really took off. I mean, we went from a startup in the end of '95 to doing close to $20 million in revenue less than 2 years later.
Wow, that's absolutely incredible. 0 to 20 million in 2 years. How did you do it? Was it through marketing? Was it through sales? Did you apply some of the lessons you learned in college?
I think we caught the wave at a really good time. The sport was growing. We were uniquely situated to take advantage of that, being in North Carolina and the relationships that we had with some of the race teams. And the sport was, growing geographically. So, what started out as a sport that was really concentrated, in the Southeast was growing across the country. More and more fans were waking up to the sport, and, we started moving our product into traditional retail stores like Walmart, like Kmart, like Target. And so those retailers were starting to carry NASCAR apparel as well. And so I think that helped, fuel some of the growth that we were seeing in that business.
At that time, did you have to work with NASCAR to become like a licensed provider of their sport?
We did. So, the interesting thing about NASCAR at the time was that unlike the NFL or Major League Baseball, where you deal with NFL properties and you then get the ability to use all 32 teams, in NASCAR, you had to negotiate with each driver individually. You had to negotiate with the teams. So the driver gives you, the signature, the likeness. The team gives you the number and the car. And then NASCAR gives you just the NASCAR logo. But at the same time, it was so early in the licensing days for NASCAR that it was pretty easy to get those licenses. As long as you were a legitimate company and producing a good product, those companies wanted to do business with you. Much easier than dealing with the other professional sports at the time. And that was really why we were so attracted to NASCAR, is because we were able to get in at essentially the ground floor.
At the time, did they have logos on the cars, or?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, there was plenty of merchandising going on in the sport. All the logos and all the stickers, on the cars. I mean, that's what funded the teams. NASCAR's an expensive sport. It's expensive to build those cars and to travel into the races. And so it's always been sponsor-driven. The apparel was just another revenue stream for these drivers and for the teams to make some extra money.
Okay, so you grew it to about $20 million, and did you sell out then, or did you start?
I did, yeah. So I sold my interest in the company back in 1997, and that gave me the opportunity to then explore other things that I wanted to do.
Oh, okay, so you were there for a few years. For some reason, I thought you were just there for about 2 years, but it sounds like you were there
2 years, 95 to 97.
Okay, so
it wasn't even 2 years. Yeah.
Okay, so you were doing the printing at University Sportswear for about 10 years then, or for about 7 years?
Yeah, from 87 to 95.
And then what did you do after that? Is that when you decided to do Inventus?
Yeah, so that's when I started inventing. So after selling the business, I took some time off. I started doing some teaching. I've always, had a strong interest in kind of sharing experiences and knowledge with others. But I kind of caught the invention bug towards the end of, I guess it was around 98, that there had to be better ways of doing things. And so that's when I started developing products, licensing products, and ultimately that's led me to where I am today.
You've been listening to episode 27 of the Invention Stories podcast, our interview with Louis Foreman, part 1. I want to thank Louis for being our guest today. More information can be found at www.ventuspartners.com. That's www.enventyspartners.com and at www.edisonnation.com. The Invention Stories podcast has been sponsored by The Socket Saver. Does the plug fall out of your wall socket while vacuuming, drying your hair, using a power tool, or recharging your electronic devices? The Socket Saver is an easy, safe, and effective solution. Please visit www.socketsaver.com. If you're an inventor who would like to be featured on the Invention Stories podcast, have a suggestion on how we can make this podcast better, or would like to become a sponsor, please contact us at inventionstoriespodcast@gmail.com. If you've enjoyed this podcast, we invite you to write a positive review for us on iTunes. An easy way to get there is to go to www.inventionstories.com/review. More information and show notes can be found at our website, www.inventionstories.com. Thank you very much for listening today, and please tell a friend.